There's a silence women carry, a silence that doesn't scream, it sighs. It hides behind polite smiles and perfectly filtered photos. It wakes up beside someone who doesn't see her soul anymore, or maybe never did. And day by day, that silence grows into distance until loyalty feels more like loneliness dressed in duty. Women don't cheat because they want variety. They cheat because something inside them is starving. Starving for connection, for affection, for conversation that doesn't feel like a transaction, for someone to see her, not just her body, not just her routines, but her being. You want to know why it happens more now? Because she's done apologizing for not being content with crumbs. She's done clinging to promises that only echo when they should resound. She's tired of being the only one fighting for a relationship that's supposed to be mutual. So, she steps outside of it emotionally, mentally, and yes, sometimes physically, not out of rebellion, but out of quiet resignation. A woman's heart doesn't wander overnight, it leaves in layers. One ignored text at a time, one cold dinner table conversation at a time, one broken expectation at a time, until what was once sacred becomes survival. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. When a woman cheats, she already cried in the shower for months. She already begged in her mind 1,000 ways, see me, hold me, choose me again. But when you treat a woman like furniture in your life, just there, functional, familiar, rarely appreciated, don't be surprised when someone else walks in and offers her what you've forgotten, presence. And no, this isn't about justification. This isn't about glamorizing betrayal. It's about understanding the fracture before we judge the fallout. You see, when men cheat, people say it's just physical. But when women cheat, it's deeply emotional. It's not a moment, it's a pattern, a trail of unmet needs, a cry for validation that's been silenced for too long. And let's be clear, this isn't about selfishness. This is about suffocation. This is about a woman giving and giving until she loses herself, and then finds someone who reminds her she still exists as a woman, not just a partner. We live in a world that tells women to endure, to be patient, to pray harder, to stay even when their soul is crumbling. But very few tell them that emotional starvation is a real thing. Very few say that loyalty without love becomes a prison. So why do women cheat more? Because more women are waking up to the realization that love isn't supposed to hurt more than it heals, that being in a relationship doesn't mean being invisible, that commitment doesn't mean crucifixion. They're waking up to the truth that they deserve more than bare minimum love. And if they don't leave physically, some have already left mentally. They're checked out, smiling on the outside, empty on the inside. Because being with someone and still feeling alone is worse than being alone. So maybe instead of blaming, we start listening. Instead of shaming, we start understanding. Because women don't cheat just to betray. They cheat because they've been betrayed long before the act. Betrayed by neglect, by silence, by the absence of emotional intimacy. And when you water a woman with love, presence, and emotional safety, she blooms. But when you abandon her soul, don't be shocked when she seeks sunlight elsewhere. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't begin in the bedroom. It begins in the silence between two people who once spoke in the language of laughter and late night confessions. It begins in the little moments that go unnoticed, when her eyes stop lighting up when he enters the room, when her words start shrinking into one word answers, when her heart stops racing and starts retreating. And it's not because she fell out of love, it's because she fell out of feeling loved. Emotional starvation is subtle. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It creeps in like a drought. At first, you don't notice it. You think maybe you're just tired, maybe life is just busy, maybe this is what long-term relationships are supposed to feel like: routine, predictable, quiet, but deep down, something starts to ache. Something starts to question. Something inside her whispers, is this all I get? Is this what forever looks like? A woman doesn't ask for much when she loves deeply. She doesn't need grand gestures or perfect poetry. What she needs is presence. Presence that doesn't just sit beside her but sees her, not just with the eyes, but with the soul. Presence that asks how her day was and stays long enough to listen. Presence that notices when her energy shifts. Presence that recognizes when her smile is masking something deeper, but when that presence begins to fade, when her emotions are no longer mirrored or acknowledged, she starts to feel alone in a space meant for two. She begins to question her value, not because she lacks it, but because it's no longer reflected back to her. Love is a mirror, and when that mirror stops showing her who she is cherished, adored, appreciated, she starts to disappear in her own eyes. There's a moment, quiet, undramatic, when a woman realizes she's been showing up in a relationship where her soul has been left waiting. She makes the dinner, she sends the check-in texts, she does the things that love requires, but her spirit is starving for affection that doesn't feel automated, starving for compliments that aren't just recycled habits, starving for intimacy that begins with words and ends in genuine warmth. But when all of that dries up, when her emotional needs are filed under later, or not now, she starts to believe maybe they were never valid to begin with. So what does emotional starvation do to a woman? It turns her into a stranger to herself. It makes her doubt her intuition, her worth, her softness. She becomes quieter, colder, and more distant, not because she wants to hurt anyone, but because she's trying to protect herself. Her heart becomes a vault, not because she's hiding something, but because every time she opened it, no one looked inside. And here's what most don't understand: cheating, for a woman, is rarely about the physical. It's about the emotional intimacy she tried to hold on to with both hands until they bled. It's about the conversations she tried to have, the moments she tried to create, the love she tried to breathe life back into. When all of that failed, betrayal wasn't a decision, it was a retreat into the arms of someone who looked at her like she was art again, someone who asked questions and waited for answers, someone who made her feel seen without trying too hard, someone who filled the empty places with attention, affection, and emotional curiosity. By the time she cheats emotionally or physically, she has already died 100 small deaths inside the relationship. She has already begged in silent ways, with her mood swings, with her withdrawal, with her changed tone. She has already screamed through silence, hoping someone would notice the shift before it became a fracture. But when no one comes looking, she goes searching. This isn't about justification, this is about understanding. It's about tracing the path back to where it all began. It began with a love that stopped growing, a bond that was no longer nurtured, a home that became a hotel, functional but cold. Women don't cheat because they're bored. They cheat because they've been emotionally homeless in their own relationship for far too long. The betrayal didn't begin the night she met someone else. It began the day her needs were minimized, the day she was told she was too emotional, too sensitive, too dramatic, when in truth, she was just expressive, attuned, and deeply connected to her heart. It began the moment her emotional language was misunderstood as weakness, when in reality, it was a cry for connection. You can't expect a woman to keep pouring love into a well that gives nothing back. You can't expect her to keep showing up with soft hands and an open heart when all she receives is distance in return. Love, at its core, is a form of nourishment, and when the emotional nutrients disappear, so does the soul's desire to stay. Sometimes the betrayal doesn't even come in the form of another person. Sometimes She cheats with her imagination. She drifts away into daydreams where she's heard, touched, pursued. She fantasizes about someone who looks at her like a mystery instead of a routine. Someone who listens not just with interest but with intent. Someone who makes her feel alive, not out of obligation, but out of awe. That's what emotional starvation does. It makes her vulnerable to affection that remembers her name, her favorite book, the way she twists her hair when she's nervous. Affection that doesn't just compliment her appearance, but celebrates her existence. When she doesn't get that in her relationship, she may begin to believe that such affection doesn't exist. Until someone, somewhere, proves it does, and suddenly, her reality feels like betrayal to her own heart. Women don't cheat because they're careless. They cheat because they've been careful for so long that they forgot how to feel. They cheat not because they stopped loving their partner, but because they stopped recognizing themselves in the mirror. And when another presence helps them remember who they are, not just what they do, it feels like freedom. It feels like being chosen again. It's easy to condemn the act, but it's harder to acknowledge the emptiness that led to it. Emotional starvation is not visible on the surface. There are no bruises, no loud arguments, no slammed doors, just long nights, heavy hearts, and unanswered prayers. Just a woman sitting across from someone who used to be her best friend, wondering when their conversations became exchanges of logistics instead of love. And in the quietness of that space, she makes a choice. Not to betray, but to survive. Not to destroy, but to be seen. And while the world may only notice the final act, she knows the betrayal started long before the script ever played out. It started in the absence, in the emotional neglect, in the quiet dismissal of everything that made her feel cherished. When a woman cheats, the world asks, what did she do? But maybe the better question is, what was done to her soul over time? What needs went unmet? What feelings went ignored? What love did she try to offer, only to have it returned with routine and half listening? There's nothing more devastating than giving your heart to someone who holds it with disinterest. Nothing more exhausting than loving through silence and trying to revive a connection that keeps slipping away. A woman who cheats is not proud, she is pained. She is layered in stories no one cared enough to read. And if we ever hope to understand her choices, we must stop looking only at her actions and start listening to the emotional history that led there. Betrayal is never a starting point. It's always the final page of a story filled with emotional famine. A story she wrote in whispers, sighs, and suppressed needs until someone finally listened. Cheating is rarely spontaneous. It's not born from a moment of lust, a sudden impulse, or a reckless decision. It's born from a slow erosion of connection, a quiet unraveling of emotional threads, one overlooked moment at a time. It's the result of gradual detachment, and by the time the betrayal happens, the bond was already broken in places no one could see. A woman doesn't just wake up one day and betray the love she once fought to protect. It happens in phases. In the beginning, there's hope. She sees the cracks forming but believes they can be fixed. She tries. She speaks up. She reaches out. She touches gently. She reminds softly. And even when she's met with indifference, she still holds on, because women like her don't quit at the first sign of trouble. They invest. They build, they stay, but over time, when her efforts are met with silence or worse, complacency, something inside her begins to dim. It's subtle. The first detachment isn't loud. It begins with emotional withdrawal. She stops sharing the small things, stops giving the little updates about her day, stops inviting the other person into her inner world, not out of spite, but because that space has stopped feeling safe. She stops talking about her dreams, stops asking for connection, because every time she did, she was met with a wall instead of warmth, and so she begins to detach, not because she wants to, but because her heart is tired of knocking on a door that no longer opens. She starts to retreat into herself. The conversations become mechanical, the laughter is rehearsed, intimacy feels like an obligation instead of a desire. And when her heart tries to speak, she silences it before anyone else can, because nothing stings more than emotional vulnerability being met with emotional vacancy. The second layer of detachment comes when she begins to feel more alone with someone than she ever did on her own. It's a unique kind of loneliness, the kind that doesn't come from being physically alone, but from being emotionally abandoned, the kind where she shares a bed with someone but feels 1,000 miles away, the kind where she smiles in pictures but cries in silence, and in that gap between what she shows and what she feels, the distance widens. No one sees the inner conflict. No one sees the way she battles herself, telling her heart to be patient, her spirit to stay hopeful, her love to be resilient. But the truth is, even the strongest woman has a threshold. Even the most devoted heart gets tired. Because you cannot keep giving to a relationship that has stopped giving back and expect your soul to thrive. You cannot keep showing up for someone who stopped showing up for you and not expect parts of yourself to disappear. And then one day something shifts, not outside, inside. She stops fighting, not because she stopped caring, but because she finally accepted that caring alone isn't enough. Love, in its truest form, is mutual. It's reciprocal. It's two people leaning in, not one person leaning so far they lose their balance. She stops trying to fix the silence, to read between the lines, to decode emotional distance like it's a puzzle meant to be solved. At that point, the detachment is complete. She still goes through the motions, she still shows up, but something essential is gone. Her heart is no longer in it, and here's the part that most never see: she doesn't cheat at this point because she's looking for excitement or escape. She cheats because she already left emotionally, long before her body followed. And by the time someone else enters the picture, she's not comparing two people. She's contrasting two emotional realities, one where she's invisible and one where she's seen. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it starts with someone simply listening, someone noticing what's been missed, someone being present in a way her partner no longer is. And that attention, that presence, that emotional nourishment, it feels like oxygen after years of suffocation. It feels like sunlight after seasons of cold. And for the first time in a long time, she feels alive, not just as a partner, but as a woman. The betrayal then becomes a symptom, not a cause. It's the final act in a long play of silence, detachment, and unmet needs. And what the world sees as betrayal is often her last resort, the moment when her soul found a voice it couldn't ignore anymore. It's not the beginning of her disloyalty, it's the conclusion of her isolation. Gradual detachment doesn't always look like arguments or slamming doors. Sometimes it looks like smiles that no longer reach the eyes, hugs that feel empty, conversations that skim the surface. It's two people living parallel lives in the same space. Two hearts that once beat in sync, now drifting like strangers. It's subtle, tragic, and deeply painful. And because it's quiet, people rarely notice until it's too late. And for the woman who cheats, the guilt is not always absent. But the clarity is stronger than the shame, because once you've starved emotionally for long enough, survival becomes instinct. You stop waiting for someone to feed you and start finding your own nourishment. And if that nourishment comes from someone who sees your worth, who reignites your light, who reminds you that you are still capable of being loved fully, the betrayal of the relationship feels less significant than the betrayal you endure daily in the form of neglect. People ask why she didn't just leave, but they don't understand that women often stay long after they should, not because they're weak, but because they believe in redemption. They believe in loyalty. They believe in second chances. She stayed because she loved, and then she cheated because she stopped being loved back. Gradual detachment is the real infidelity. The moment one partner stops trying, stops listening, stops nurturing, stops seeing. That is the beginning of the end. That is where the roots rot long before the tree falls. And by the time infidelity enters, the emotional foundation is already cracked. The heart is already displaced. So no, cheating doesn't begin with another person. It begins with the absence of one. It begins when emotional intimacy is replaced by emotional absence, when shared spaces become empty echoes, when love becomes a routine and affection becomes a habit instead of a feeling. That's when she starts detaching, piece by piece, word by word, emotion by emotion, and once that detachment is complete, once her heart has found a new home in the emotional attention of someone else, the betrayal isn't a rebellion. It's a conclusion to a story that was already ending long before the final page turned. There's a kind of love that doesn't feel like love at all. It sounds right on paper. It looks good in photographs. It fits every social standard and checks every box of what people think a relationship should be. But beneath the surface, behind the curated smiles and polite exchanges, is a quiet ache that never leaves. Because love without presence becomes the most beautiful kind of cage. A woman doesn't fall in love with empty space. She falls in love with connection, with being seen, with being heard, with being understood without needing to explain herself. Presence is not about proximity. It's not about sharing a bed or a roof or a last name. Presence is about emotional closeness. It's about making someone feel like they matter even in the chaos of daily life. But when love begins to exist without that presence, it stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling like captivity. She starts to count the ways she feels unseen, the way he nods through her stories but doesn't remember them, the way she dresses up and he doesn't notice, the way her energy shifts and he doesn't ask why. It's not about needing constant attention. It's about craving meaningful attention. It's about the subtle yet sacred ways women feel connection through thoughtful gestures, through eye contact that lingers, through words that meet her where her soul lives. When those things fade, she doesn't always speak up. At first, she rationalizes it. Life is busy, he's tired, work is demanding. But over time, she notices a pattern. His absence is no longer temporary. It's the new normal. He's there, but not really. His body shows up, but his mind doesn't. His heart is elsewhere, or worse, it's nowhere at all. And that's when she starts to feel alone, not in her life, but in her love. She begins to shrink in the spaces where she was meant to expand. She stops initiating conversations because she's tired of carrying both sides. She stops making plans because effort without reciprocation feels like begging. She stops opening up because her vulnerability keeps falling into emotional void. And with every moment of being met with less, she becomes less expressive, less giving, less hopeful. Not because she wants to, but because she's learning how to survive inside a love that has forgotten how to hold her. It's a silent kind of suffering. The world sees the photos, the anniversaries, the smiles at dinner parties. They don't see her crying in the bathroom, feeling like a ghost in her own home. They don't see the emotional labor she performs just to keep the relationship breathing. They don't see her staring out the window late at night, wondering when her love story stopped being a place of refuge and started feeling like a sentence she was serving. Love without presence becomes punishment. It teaches her that her needs are too much, that her emotions are inconvenient, that her heart is a burden instead of a blessing. And yet, she still tries, because women are conditioned to make excuses for love that hurts. She tells herself this is what maturity looks like, that maybe it's selfish to want more, that love isn't supposed to feel magical every day. And while some of that is true, The most dangerous lie she starts to believe is that love should feel this lonely. There's a version of her that existed before the absence, a vibrant, laughing, expressive woman who gave her all and expected the same in return. That version begins to fade because love, when not watered with presence, wilts even the most radiant soul. And what remains is a shell of who she used to be, a woman going through the motions, giving love without being nourished in return. She starts to fantasize not necessarily about someone else, but about something else. A different life, a different kind of love, one where her emotions are celebrated, not tolerated, one where she's not just part of someone's life, but prioritized in it, one where she feels like a partner, not a placeholder. And even though she's physically committed, her mind starts to wander, her heart starts to question, her soul starts to ask, is this it? Is this all I'm meant to receive? It doesn't always end in betrayal. Sometimes it just ends in emotional detachment. She learns how to fulfill herself, how to stop expecting affection, how to stop needing warmth. She builds a world inside herself because the world she shares with him has gone cold. And in that self-sufficiency, there's power but also profound sadness, because no woman should have to become emotionally independent just to survive her own relationship. Presence is not about being perfect. It's about being present. It's in the little things, texting back with intention, asking how she's doing and actually listening, remembering what matters to her, holding space for her feelings without trying to fix them or dismiss them. It's saying, I see you, I hear you, I value what you're sharing. Without those things, love becomes performance, a routine, a checklist, and eventually a prison. And here's the truth no one wants to say: you can love someone and still make them feel abandoned. You can stay in the relationship and still be emotionally gone. You can do the duties of partnership and still make the other person feel invisible. Emotional absence is more painful than physical absence because it's a wound that never scabs over. It's the kind of pain that whispers, you're not enough to keep their attention. And when someone hears that long enough, they start to believe it. There's no joy in staying for the sake of staying. No healing in being loyal to a connection that only exists in name. A woman doesn't want presence in the form of empty gestures. She wants to feel chosen every day, not just on special occasions. She wants to be loved in the quiet, in the chaos, in the moments that feel ordinary. Because love that's only loud on holidays but silent in everyday life isn't love, it's a performance. When presence disappears, everything else follows. Respect fades, intimacy dims, trust erodes, and yet the world tells her to stay, to compromise, to not expect too much. But what the world doesn't understand is that presence is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Without it, love dies slowly, and so does the woman who gives herself to that love without receiving anything back. No one tells you how heavy it feels to be loved half-heartedly, how exhausting it is to constantly hope for emotional return on your investment, how lonely it is to lay beside someone whose attention is always elsewhere, on their phone, on their work, on the noise of everything but you. Love without presence doesn't just disappoint, it erodes self-worth. It makes a woman question whether she is hard to love, instead of realizing she was never truly loved in the first place. And so, she stays until she can't. She loves until it starts hurting more than healing. She hopes until hope starts sounding like denial. And when she finally walks away, people will say she gave up too soon. But only she will know how long she stayed while her soul screamed for freedom. Only she will remember the nights she cried herself to sleep beside someone who didn't notice. Only she will carry the story of what it's like to feel caged by a love that once promised to set her free. There is a quiet revolution happening. It's not on the news, it's not always spoken aloud, but it's echoing in the hearts of women around the world. It's a whisper that turns into a roar, a deep knowing rising from the depths of her soul. Women are awakening to their worth, and once she awakens, she will never go back to sleep. This awakening doesn't come suddenly. It doesn't arrive like a dramatic storm. It comes in moments. Moments where she no longer laughs at jokes that belittle her. Moments where she refuses to apologize for needing more. Moments where she stops trying to prove herself to people who refuse to see her. It comes when she finally realizes that what she thought was love was just a version of herself settling for less than she deserved. It begins when she stops mistaking attention for affection, when she stops romanticizing inconsistency, when she stops thinking that love means tolerating emotional neglect. Because for too long, women were taught that endurance was loyalty, that silence was strength, that bending herself to fit someone else's vision of her was what a good woman did. But that version of womanhood is dying, and in its place is rising a woman who knows exactly who she is, what she brings, and what she will never tolerate again. She is no longer asking for permission to be heard. She is no longer dimming her light so that others feel comfortable. She is no longer shrinking herself to avoid being called too much, because she now knows she was never too much. She was just surrounded by people who were not enough to hold her greatness, and that truth is no longer painful, it's liberating. This woman, the one who has awakened, is dangerous to systems built on her silence. She is a threat to the relationships that fed on her self-doubt. She walks differently now. She speaks with conviction. She loves herself out loud. And most importantly, she no longer negotiates her value. She knows she is the prize, not in arrogance, but in alignment with who God created her to be. Her worth is not a trend. It's not conditional. It's eternal. She no longer stays in places that deplete her. Not because she's bitter, but because she finally understands her energy is sacred. She no longer over-explains herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. She no longer waits for someone to choose her because she has already chosen herself. And that self-choosing is not selfish, it's survival. It's the root of every boundary, every standard, every graceful no. She now delivers without guilt. This awakening often comes after heartbreak, after betrayal, after being silenced, dismissed, abandoned. But make no mistake, those moments did not break her. They built her. Every tear became a prayer. Every rejection became redirection. Every painful ending became a sacred beginning. And now she walks through life with discernment, with purpose, with fire in her eyes and softness in her heart. Because awakening doesn't harden her, it strengthens her without robbing her tenderness. She now understands that being needed is not the same as being loved, that being chased is not the same as being chosen, that being kept around is not the same as being prioritized, and she refuses to mistake proximity for presence. She would rather be alone in truth than accompanied in pretense, because peace has become her standard, and anything that costs her peace is too expensive. This woman no longer gets high off potential. She sees people for who they are, not who they could be. She doesn't build homes in people who only offer shelter when it's convenient. She's not trying to rescue, fix, or heal people who weaponize their wounds. Her compassion is still intact, but it is no longer self-sacrificial. She can love you and still walk away. She can forgive you and never allow you back in. That's the power of a woman who has remembered her worth. And this power isn't loud or boastful. It's quiet and unshakable. It's found in the way she takes care of herself, in the way she honors her boundaries, in the way she prays for discernment instead of blindly trusting charm, in the way she smiles not because everything is perfect, but because she's no longer pretending. She has tasted alignment, and she will never again settle for confusion. She now surrounds herself with people who speak life into her, who see her strength and don't feel threatened, who celebrate her softness and don't exploit it, who recognize her ambition and don't try to suppress it, because she has learned the hard way that not everyone deserves access to her. Access is a privilege, not a right, and she protects her energy like royalty because that's exactly what she is. She is healing generations of women who were told to stay quiet, who were told to settle, who were told that love meant suffering, who were told that their worth was based on how much they could endure. No more. She is breaking those chains, not just for herself, but for every daughter, every sister, every friend who has watched her rise and thought, maybe I can rise too. And the most beautiful part of this awakening, it doesn't make her love less, it makes her love better, deeper, purer. She doesn't love from fear anymore. She doesn't attach from insecurity. She doesn't cling to what doesn't serve her. Her love is intentional. It is anchored in truth. It is given freely, but never at the expense of herself. She has learned that being alone is not a punishment. It is a season of clarity, a sacred time of becoming. And now, she is no longer afraid of solitude. She welcomes it because the relationship she has with herself has become her foundation. She no longer needs someone to complete her. She is already whole. And anyone who comes into her life must come with wholeness too. Otherwise, they will find no room in a space that has been cleared of chaos. Her standards are not negotiable, not because she's hard to please, but because she knows her peace is non-negotiable. She has sacrificed too much to become this version of herself, and she will not betray herself for temporary companionship, superficial validation, or counterfeit connections. She is not desperate. She is deliberate. She is not waiting. She is walking in alignment, in purpose, in power. And while the world may call her intimidating, cold, or complicated, she knows the truth. She is simply awakened. She is simply aware. She is simply unwilling to pretend that less is enough, and that in itself is a revolution. She is not angry. She is not broken. She is not bitter. She is awake, awake to her beauty, awake to her strength, awake to the divine calling on her life. And that awakening is the beginning of everything she was always meant to become.